We're joined again here on Flow FM by the CEO of Sheep Producers Australia, Bonnie Skinner. Bonnie, Happy New Year. I think this is the first time we've spoken this year, isn't it?
It is, yes. Happy New Year.
Look, it's certainly the calendar doesn't rest when it comes to farmers and what they've got to do out there on the land, and the debate about traceability certainly hasn't gone to sleep over the holidays. You've been involved in the latest steering group meeting about that. What's the latest?
Yep, absolutely. Traceability issues certainly don't rest. So our national task force met last Monday to touch base after the holidays and reconvene on a couple of issues, particularly around progressing what we're working on at the moment, which is sort of a national work plan. So, each state is ultimately responsible for designing how it's going to work towards implementation and work towards the goals that have been outlined by the ministers, the agricultural ministers at the end of last year. So trying to get an update on where everybody's up to on that and probably addressing some of our longer-term strategic issues around traceability more broadly, things like enhancing the capability of the database, which obviously there was a lot of funding announced for that in the October budget. And also looking to sort of pick up the conversation again around, the governance arrangements around a national traceability system. So a few different things going on there, and obviously some key issues to progress around tag costs and tag prices, which I know are on a lot of producers' minds at the moment.
It's been a regular topic we've had discussed here about just who pays what, whether it's all producers or a share across the whole of industry that's involved in the interest of biosecurity and animal welfare, or whether government stumps up a fair bit. I think there was sort of a three-way split is generally where things seem to have landed, isn't it? Federal, state and producers?
Yeah, it's still something that's up for discussion and something that we're very keen to see progress is what does this cost-sharing, long-term sort of sustainable cost-sharing mechanism look like? I think, a third gets discussed quite a bit. And I think it is fair when everybody talks about it that, everybody benefits for the system and everybody needs to sort of contribute to maintaining that system. What's fair, actually, there's probably a few different views on that, but it is, in terms of coming up with a sustainable co-funding mechanism, that was one of the key recommendations that also came out of the Senate inquiry that was held last year on Australia's biosecurity arrangements. So it's something that we're looking to be progressed this year. It's something that we called for in our budget submission that we put in last week as well, is that federal government really look to address that issue. And so we hope that there'll be some progress on that this year.
Well, one of the, the concerns out of traceability is the idea that animal welfare finds its way into that conversation. Would there be a case for a four-way split where I know farmers, it's very hard for them to, they're always price takers. Would there be a case for maybe at the supermarket or at least at the consumer end, there might be a contribution they pay and what they pay for the food, just like they've had to do, say, with, free-range eggs?
Yeah, I think that's been discussed in a couple of forums that I've been a part of, and certainly, let's have the conversation. I think for me, coming back to first principles around why we have our traceability systems in place and the market access and the prices that they do afford producers needs to be an important part of that conversation as well, and making sure that everybody's doing their best to uphold the system and ensure that it's working to the best of its abilities. I think there is exciting opportunities that could be explored as a part of this to bolster, the provenance claims around lamb, and that's something that the industry is always looking really closely at because it is a premium product. And lamb, particularly in Australia, lamb production has a great story to tell that a lot of consumers want to find out about. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely something that's worth exploring.
Well, speaking of positive stories, there's been a little bit of an uplift for the producers at the sale yards, but there has been some concern expressed here on Flow by one of our analysts and even in the political space about processor capacity and what that could mean during this year. It all filters back to this issue of labour supply at the meatworks. So what are you hearing around from producers?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it is an ongoing concern and look, labour availability and unemployment rates across the country, it's an issue that's affecting pretty much every sector at the moment. It seems it's an interesting story that I hear across the grounds. We've just had obviously JBS announce that they're reopening in Cobram yesterday. Different sort of stories around the country, but certainly we're still seeing the effect of backlogs of visa approvals coming through. those visa approvals are not at those pre-pandemic levels, and we know that about a quarter of the workforce, when it comes to processes, are made up from visa-approved arrangements. So that is going to take a while to work through. I think they're also facing some staffing issues at the end that they need to process those visas. So the pain is shared a little bit there. We've got competition from other sectors around the country, so that unskilled labour component as well. And I think just with regards to, people who are processes that are able to attract workers, they're needing to look at things like making sure that they've got, the right training and the upskilling and the investment going into that, making sure that they're offering an enticing employment package for domestic workers. So, different stories from different people on that, but I think that's something that we're going to continue to grapple with as the year goes on, and I think it points to that long-term succession planning issue that we've got with our domestic processing capacity and what strategic investments can be made around that.
Yeah, it's a point we are probably due for a chat again with the Agriculture Minister, Murray Watt. Before he last went overseas, he did say the federal government had chucked on a whole bunch of new staff into immigration to deal with the visa backlog he says they inherited from the former government. Is that sort of some comfort, I guess, or are we not yet seeing that backlog processed?
Not yet quite seeing that backlog ease. So, these things do take time. We obviously just had holidays as well, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's going to be a while before we see that sort of issue start to ease. It's promising to hear that they're putting more people on. But again, as I said, this worker issue, this employment issue is facing everybody across the country. So they're grappling with it just like everybody else is. But we'll try and be positive about that one, Ricky.
Yeah, for sure. Now, out in the paddock, some of the concern must be arising, certainly in some of our broadcast areas, with workshops underway in terms of addressing sheep mortality or lamb mortality in the paddock. Just on a overarching level, what has the Sheep Producers Australia been involved in to try and, I guess, improve mortality outcomes for farmers?
Yeah, this has been a strategic focus of the lamb industry for decades really. At the moment, we've at a very high level, overarching level, we're involved in what's called the Sheep Reproductive Strategic Partnership, which is an initiative to sort of build on existing research and adoption initiatives to try and look at promoting best practice management around lamb survivability and ewe reproductive performance, looking at where the gaps are with regards to R&D and particularly extension to and trying to fill those. What other sort of emerging technologies are coming through that need to be supported with R&D and extension and adoption. But ultimately, when we talk about lamb survivability issues, we come back to really the key things that have been talked around extension tables for a long time. And I know a lot of producers are interested in lambing performance, reducing those lambing losses. And ultimately, we're also talking about improving the welfare of livestock across the farm as well. So, it is zoning in on things like, ewe nutrition, making sure that ewe condition scores are maintained at the appropriate level. Genetics play a massive factor in that, particularly also when you're looking at maiden ewes with regards to your dystocia issues. What feed have you got on offer in the paddocks and how are you managing that through your lambing cycles, things like your mob sizes. So there's some really, tried and true tactics out there that have been talked about for a very long time, and it's fantastic to see producers take up the opportunity to learn how to improve their practices on farm. I think the other component to all of this as well is data collection and the opportunities for collecting really important data at lambing, and perhaps that's another opportunity that's going to potentially be afforded by national EID as well in terms of farmers taking that up.
That's a very good point, because it does sort of segue, if I can, into the topic of livestock theft, sheep theft. Sometimes farmers have been reticent to report it for their own, very personal reasons, but does it sort of link into that? Is encouraging data availability, regardless of, what impact it might mean to your own reputation, because it does help the industry more broadly prevent these sorts of things happening? Yeah,
absolutely. A big important component of the NLIS is undertaking a stock inventory every year. Obviously something like EID tags helps you to undertake sort of more accurate inventories, and it's not something that's probably done as much as it ought to be done around the country, just according to the NIS database. And we need to understand how we continue to adapt and use this data to, exactly support support what the industry is trying to do around a range of initiatives. So I think, from where we sit at Sheep Producers Australia, something like the advent of national EID implementation is really interesting to understand, what can we do to basically take advantage of this massive opportunity to collect data and not overcomplicate it either. It needs to be a simple transition, but, I think there is a big opportunity there. And stock inventory, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. But it is, in terms of national interest, producers looking over their fences to understand how what they're doing on their farm is going to affect everybody else, and that's a classic example.
Yeah, Bonnie, you got a lot on your plate, and thanks for a comprehensive wrap. But speaking of plates, before we go, did you get into some lamb for Australia Day?
I absolutely did. I enjoyed some good lamb cutlets. I hope everybody's enjoyed the lamb day ad out there. I think it's been the most successful one that's been launched so far. So absolutely, it would be un-Australian of me not to have some lamb on the plate.
Good on you. Bonnie Skinner, the CEO of Sheep Producers Australia. Thanks so much for joining us again on Flow.
Thank you. Talk soon.